Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show, designers discussing design. We're on episode 29, Escape from New York. I don't even know if I get. Oh, I do get the reference. Oh my goodness, man! It is late at night, and I am slow at the processor here. But
You're just a young whippersnapper, is what you are.
No, there's a remake. There's a remake. That's why I know of it, is because there's a remake. But we will be talking about escape rooms. Wow, I am really embarrassed that I didn't get.
And we're talking about
a move from New York, so that was well played.
I know, right?
That was actually very clever. Well played. And I'm sorry that I am slow at the uptake, but one of the things we're going to be talking about is the Nerd Nighters are just announced their winners for their contest that they've had going for the last couple months. Sen and I have been slaving the last week at judging games at like 3 in the morning, and so my brain is slowly coming back to me. So with that said, maybe Dylan, what games have you been playing? Because I feel like all Sen and I have been doing is playing prototypes. What have you been up to, Dylan?
My son Kiri has been coming up with also like every day asking me to play all sorts of different games. But we played Maneuver, at which I thoroughly schooled him. But then he came back and we started playing Battle Line, and I kind of won the first game, and he learned how to beat me very quickly. So he ended up schooling me on the very next game really fast, which was kind of embarrassing.
I was just going to say a very proud pop moment right there.
But, yeah, exactly. The pride kind of overwhelms the embarrassment, really. And, I'm looking forward to being drubbed in future. But what about you, Sen? What have you been playing?
Today we taught a bunch of Tasty Minstrel games to the clientele at the Cardboard Cafe in London, Ontario, and we taught Jab by our good friend Mr. Gavin Brown. We taught Scoville by Ed Marriott, and as I was leaving to come here for the show, I think they were starting to get into City Hall and Aquasphere, Steffensfeld. So yeah, lots of good stuff from Tasty Minstrel coming up, and thanks very much for their support at the cafe. Daryl, what about you? I know we have been playing a lot of prototypes, but have you been working on any of your own prototypes in preparation for our big trip next week?
I've been very much working on a lot of prototypes. What I didn't realize was how many prototypes I'm bringing until I had to type it out, and I emailed a publisher, and I said, hey, could I have a quick meeting with you? And then I listed the games that I had, and I was like, or if it's not quick, that might be helpful as well, because I have a dozen games with me. So that'll be, hopefully the idea is that maybe 1 or 2 is a good fit for a different publisher, so I'll find the right spot. And also, many of them are co-designs, and even one of them that's designed by a friend that I'm showing on behalf. So that is also why I'm in like prototype heaven / hell, or somewhere in between. But yeah, before
Purgatory.
Purgatory, yeah. Before we go there, before we talk about our guests, I do want to especially highlight. We mentioned about a week and a half ago. Was it a week and a half? No, 2 weeks ago, we successfully funded on Kickstarter, and we said it would be no joke. April 1st, we would make sure to thank everyone and highlight them and get them included in the credits. And we're starting to get that all worked out. Big thanks to Sen for making the great intro video with all the new logos and such. And you'll see some more in the credits at the end. But we want to verbally also send some thanks out. So I'm going to actually pass the mic over to Sen. And why don't you start us off by thanking our Meeps?
Yeah, so thanks very much, by the way, to everybody involved in this. And our Meeps, we're going to start out by thanking our good friends Ace, Andrew, Christopher Enriquez, and JR Honeycutt of the Nerd Nighters show, which we were just on, and they'll jump on later on to our show. They were some of the first supporters we had at that level, and thanks very much to Brandon Kempf, Manny Wong, our good friend Jill Hova, who we will see in a couple of days, Michael Eskew, who was one of the very first designers on this show, and also one of the very first designers outside of the Canadian designers that I actually interacted with, got his prototypes play-tested Council of Verona Forum, and it started me out on this kind of stuff as well, just reaching out to other people. Jack Smith, David McKenzie, Jason Hammer. We already mentioned this guy, but you don't know that because he's one of the guys that Gerald co-designs with, Adrian Adamescu. Artem Safarov, who has his Cauldrons on Kickstarter right now. Oh, Nicole Hoy, who was our guest host a couple weeks ago. And they're wonderful people. She's a wonderful person. They're wonderful people. Gary Dahl, Micah Fuller, one of our game artisan friends, Elfstart Games. Somebody named N. I'm not sure who that is.
Something Antros in your email?
Yeah, maybe. J. Alex Cavern, Frank Emmanuel, Jefferson Ridgepath. Jeff, I'm going to call you Jefferson from now on.
I know. I was so I thought that was
hilarious.
awesome. We're going to see him soon.
Yeah, George Beecher, Doug Morse, who we won't be seeing this year because he's on sabbatical in England, but we'll see you next year. Abe. Hey, Abe. That's awesome. I didn't know he did this. Chris Bryan, who we just talked an awful lot about on Nerd Nighters for his game Echo Alchemist. Bebo, our other live from the Mox correspondents. Baksha Games, Andrew Brooks, Nicholas Yu of Zucchini People Games. Oh, who else is there? There's a whole bunch of people here. There's Barry Reynolds, the Crossroad Cafe in Waterloo, wonderful place. George Morgan, our wonderful friend Tanya Cook-Thompson. Congratulations, Tanya, for taking your new position at Mastermind Toys. Richard Mulholland, who I believe I just kicked his ass in Star Realms. Or he might have kicked mine, I can't remember. Oh, I had 2 runs of like 30-plus hits on him, so yeah, I kicked his ass. Ray Slover, thanks very much. Shoot Again Games. Jeff Stahl, who is a war game designer extraordinaire and
award-winning.
Yeah. Jason Gautreau. Aaron Lim, who probably is related to me. His family is from Hainan as well, and he's a Lim, and we're all related. Curtis McGill, Mike Hollyoak, Bill Corey, and hey, Hendy.
My mom.
Your mom, she's wonderful. And then I believe there's a couple other people that, for some reason, aren't on this list.
No. All right. Well,
let's move on.
All right, so we'll see. Maybe there's more that we're missing. But I'm going to jump to the fan cakes. Again, thank you to Evan Derrick, Suzanne Sheldon, both been on the show. We love you. Daniel Rocky, game artisan whom we love. Josh Capel, someone dear to our hearts. Cow and Duck Studios, I got to give a shout out specifically to Katie and Jessica, who make great games. Eric Moon, thank you, good friend. Ed Bryan, Jeffrey, I'm not sure your last name, but thank you, Jeff. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mad Mike D444. Again, I'm sorry I don't know you, but I hope to. Scott Newak Thompson, and Elspeth Kirk, which I believe is another mum.
And that's a good segue to this one.
Yeah, you did pretty well on the pronunciation on that one, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm going to be doing the producers, where we have Nathan Miller and Stephen Always Sweet Never Sour. We've got Greg Jazzy Bear Brown, Chris Handy. It is.
I thought you were going to keep adding nicknames.
So did I. And I was going to laugh all through them.
Well, see, I don't know is Chris Handy, if he knows the old red green, if you can't be handsome, you may as well be handy.
Nice. Dating content.
And yeah, you got to get your CanCon in there. Eli Gingrich, hopefully no relation. Eric Martin, Maurice Fitzgerald, Marquis Cote, Jennifer Geske, Michael Dorsey, Brent Klink, and AJ Hare.
Yeah, and those are our producers, so they get named in our credits at the end. Yeah, so you'll see that this week. I did it last week as well, but we'll pay close attention. On to the designers. So these are people who are going to get interviews with us that they can use for whatever purposes, Kickstarter, on their webpage, whatever they need, and they can talk about their games, their companies, whatever. So Paul Sang from Toronto, Jeff Siadek, Ted Elsbach of Bezier Games, Francois Valentine, and Matt Hoy, a local London boy. Which is
I'm excited about all of those. Those are going to be fantastic. And then, similar but different, we have our play testers level. So these are people that are going to send in their games, and then Sen and I are going to play them a bunch of times, evaluate them, and then give some hopefully valuable feedback to make the games that much better and help develop them. And if any of them are interested, and we might even try to figure out a way to help represent their game if they're interested in those kind of services as well.
Yeah, and we're going to videotape all of that stuff.
Yeah, so we'll be giving them a video that's all taped that they can use to help make their games that much better. So I want to thank Bruno V. Coleman, I gave up. I'll try it once, and I'm sorry if I'm offensive. Value.
That was better than I think you've ever done before.
Yeah! All right. Cohen Hendricks, Peter Vaughn, Justin Halliday, and Jonathan Phillip Chambers. So we are really excited about seeing your games and coming alongside them and helping make them better.
And moving on to the bronze, we got some big players here. Let me tell you, Spiel Pro, Quiet Games, and Portal, that's Ignacy Cevicek, Bearded Meeple, Tyler Anderson, Low Player Count, Donny Bena, and Floodgate, Ben Harkins.
Yeah, and then on to the silvers. So in the silvers, we have Chris Moulton at the Boardroom Cafe. Congratulations on becoming a dad, Chris. Sad we can't see you this year, but hey, family first. Vicky Baxter of Strategies Cafe in Kingston, Ontario. Renegade Games, Scott Garcia, thanks so much for your support. Mr. Talton, David B. Brad Talton Jr., Level 99 Games, Sherry Spiro, we had a great talk today, Sherry, and Ad Magic, looking forward to talking more. Randy Hoyt at Foxtrot Games, they are publishing our good friend Chris Chung's Lanterns, and co-publishing that actually with Renegade Games, so Scott Garcia and Randy. Ryan and Kate from the Adventurers Guild Cafe in downtown Kitchener, Ontario, which is a wonderful place. If you ever want to go see a Rancor head mounted on a wall, that's the place to go. It's awesome.
That's where you can find one.
The Flux Capacity, Josh Bricker, very good friend of mine. He also owns a Cardboard Cafe. Thanks so much for supporting us. And Home Life Cityscape Real Estate from
Calgary.
In Calgary. If you want a house and you live in Calgary, Mr. Kirk will sort you out. Yes, please go check him. Oh, and by the way, just before we go on to our last gold sponsors and above, all these people who have bronze and above, we have all their websites and logos on our website, meeplesyrupshow.com. Please go to our sponsor page, click through, show them some love, because without them we couldn't do what we do, and let them know that you've found out about them through us. If you can, that would be wonderful. We'd appreciate that too. All right, on to gold.
On to the gold! I'm so excited. So this was, I believe, our first sponsor? Or no, second sponsor, I believe. Board Game Geek was
our first sponsor. I think was Evan.
Yes, you're right. So our second sponsor, Board Game Geek. Thank you so much, Aldi, obviously, and the whole crew there. We really appreciate what you do, and obviously all gamers, we appreciate the enormous work that you pour into that. Roxley Games, Gavin Brown, who has made our fantastic logo and has just been a champion for the Meeple Syrup Show. We appreciate you.
It is very, very funny on camera.
Yeah. We got to give a shout-out to Print and Play, Andrew Tullison. If you need to make a prototype, he's your man. Look up Print and Play. I highly recommend them. I've used them, and they make incredible prototypes. Mercury Games, Kevin Nesbitt, again, biased. My first ever game was published by Mercury Games, and I will always have a special place in my heart for Mercury. Gameland Games, Michael Coe, a previous guest of the show, very generous supporter, and we appreciate you. One of my closest friends, Brian Malott with Chasing Dreams, if you're ever interested in consulting services, talk to him. An online game store we're really excited about, Board Game Bliss, Bosco Lee, wonderful customer service. Any game you need, talk to Bosco. He will even import games, phenomenal prices.
He had Mysterium before anybody else.
Anybody. I mean, honestly, I know people that order in the States from him in Canada because he's importing from Europe before everyone else. Yeah. So talk to Bosco. He'll take care of you. He literally hand-delivered a game to me in a mall on Boxing Day because I needed the game to play that afternoon with family. That's how awesome he is. So, We got Calliope Games with Ray. We got Cool Mini or Not with Spencer Reeve. Again, amazing game companies. Support them. They have some phenomenal Kickstarters coming up. And then Broken Token, Greg Spence. Again, some wonderful inserts made of rich wood. Snakes and Lattes. I want to give a special thanks here because they're beyond gold. They're one of our major sponsors. So Ben Castani, we appreciate you. We know you are a great supporter of us, and we really look forward to encouraging people to check out Snakes and Lattes, really the premier original game cafe. Also, along the lines of our major sponsors, Toy Vault, and a special thanks again to Ed, Tony, and Dale. We're really looking forward to working alongside you guys this year, and especially helping with the social media. So please, start liking their Facebook, Twitter, all those things, and we're gonna really encourage and help support what they're doing with social media. R&R Games came in a huge way as a major sponsor, so we want to thank Frank and Dan DeLorenzo. You know we love you, and we appreciate your support. We're looking forward to making some videos, so stay tuned for those for the R&R game collection. And then last but not least, came in under the wire, but Game Trays. I want to thank Noah Adelman with Game Trays. They make phenomenal, high-quality game trays for kind of really pimping out your favorite games. I would honestly say Noah is the Picasso of game inserts. So
he's more like Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, he's the Da Vinci. That's a better example. He is the Da Vinci of game inserts. So talk to him, look them up.
Blue or anything.
Yeah. So again, in short, before we wrap this up, I just want to say thank you to everyone. We are so proud to be partnered with each of you, and we hope to make some great videos.
Oh, and just because I don't think they somehow missed being on this list that I have in front of me, but thanks very much to Marcus Ross, who is a guest of the show, Discount Salmon, of course, as a Meeps, and our friend Matt Leacock. And I believe we're going to be seeing Matt next week, too, for the first time in a long time at the Gathering, which is a rarity for him to be there. So it'll be a pleasure to play games with him next week.
I do have to bring something up, gentlemen, just to interrupt for the moment.
Yeah.
There is an absolutely wonderful idea on the YouTube chat right now that for an extra $10, Daryl should promise to mispronounce people's names. It is one of the greatest ideas that I've seen. It's just, like everyone wants to kind of get rechristened with a Daryl name. I think it's great.
Darylism.
How it's kind of like the Starbucks people where they write your name and you're like, how could they screw this up? But they still do. That's what I do. It's a gift.
It's a gift. It's a gift. All right. So we've got through the thanks. Thank you guys so much one more time from the very, very bottom of my heart. And my heart is really low to the ground because I'm super short, so it's very deep. But we're going to bring our guest on the show. And for those of you who don't know who Scott Nicholson is, where have y'all been for the last 15 years? Scott is quite possibly, if not the originator of teaching people how to play games on YouTube. One of the originators, one of the very first, if not the first. He is currently teaching out Syracuse, and he's got some great news for all you Canadians in Southern Ontario and Canada-wide, hopefully. And yes, he is politely reminding me that he is the first. Awesome. So let's bring Scott into the show. And here he is.
Hi there. I thought I'd put on my fancy hat to celebrate your successful Kickstarter campaign.
Thanks very much, Scott.
But I'm going to take off my fancy hat now because it makes my headphones not sit on my head.
There you go.
There you go. Fancy hat celebration over.
Thanks
now
very
time
much.
to get on to serious podcasting.
Yes, serious.
Absolutely. So, where are we going? There's so much we can start with here. I mean, why don't we actually just get to the really great part for us Canadians, that you're actually going to be coming up here and living amongst us as
That's
one
right.
of our people.
Yes, indeed. I have recently accepted a new position. I've been at Syracuse University for 14 years. I will be leaving Syracuse to become a professor of games and director of a game design and development program that's brand new at Wilfrid Laurier University at their branch campus in Brantford, Ontario.
Yay!
That sounds amazing. Brantford, for those of you who don't know where Brantford is, it's sort of south and a little bit west of Toronto.
Yeah, go to
It's
Hamilton and go west for 30 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's 30 minutes west of Hamilton and about another 45, maybe 30 minutes from the outskirts of London, where I am. And then it's about
It's like
another
30
little
minutes
bit.
up. 30,
Another
45
30,
minutes up to
34 minutes
Kitchener.
up from Kitchener-Waterloo, where Daryl is. So expect some house guests, Scott. We're
Well,
coming in.
hopefully I'll have even more than that, in that we are working on I'm establishing the Brantford Games Network, which is going to be a program to connect what's going on in the school, what's going on in the community, and part of that, the hub of that will be the BGN Lab, where I will have a large space to be able to host regular game events. Not only I plan to host monthly board game days, but also game jams. A lot of what I've been doing at Syracuse over the last few years are programs that connect the community to the school. And they, at Wilfrid Laurier, they're very interested in having me continue that. So you can expect a lot of activities that are open for anyone to come and join in.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that we hear from schools in our area is that if the community cares about the events that happen at the school, they care more about the school itself. And that's what we do through London Family Games Day here in London. We bring the community at the school into the school so that the parents of the students are actually coming in and then start caring about the school more and the students' life at the school. But it's through games and through play, and that's really interesting that you guys are doing that at the higher academics. And so that's really interesting to me. What else are you going to be doing there? I read about video games and board games and all sorts of games. So it's
Right,
not
so
just board games.
It's right. So it's actually the program is going to be about 6 courses from. We're partnered with Conestoga College, who's going to be coming in to teach game programming. So there's going to be 6 courses on creating digital games with a focus on mobile creation.
Very nice.
We're telling students that we're not trying to create you as a cog in a giant AAA console-based wheel. That's not going to be the focus. Instead, we're more focusing on the indie world in the digital space, but really focused on educational games, games for good, healthcare, social good, connecting with informal learning. So that connection, it fits better with a mobile or lightweight programming space. But the students will also be learning analog game design and live action design. So the idea is that students who go through the program, first they're going to be game designers, but they're going to understand how to design games on many different platforms. So not just board games or not just any one type. So one of my challenges coming in is many students come into the program and they're really good at one sort of thing. And my initial challenge is going to be to broaden that and help them understand about why different sorts of games are useful. Because what we want to do is arm them with lots of playful and gameful ways to change the world. So when you see a situation, you can drop in a tool to make a difference. So that's that. I'm excited about that aspect. The other aspect I'm really excited about, their senior year, they have 2 projects. And so the first semester, they're going to make a game in the community or in partnered with schools or in partner with museums, some sort of partnership in the game for good. And then the second semester, they're going to work with an entrepreneurship center to see if their game idea has legs. To go through the process of seeing if it is valuable in the marketplace. And then there is a sandbox. There's an incubation space, so that if students, when they graduate, want to continue and actually work together with other groups of students, because we're going to have students that are going to focus a little bit more on programming or a little bit more on art or a little bit more on design, work together and actually launch some companies. So it's more of a focus on design and also project management. So the students are going to be doing some project management courses to give them another skill, because in the games industry, it's hard to get hired as just a designer. You need to have something else. And so the one thing we're making sure everyone else has is they're going to get a certificate in project management, so they can offer up both design and project management. And then everyone's going to be able, the goal is to get them to the point where they can make a digital prototype.
Awesome.
So everyone will come out with those sets of skills.
That sounds wonderful. I know one thing that really excites me is you talking about gaming for good, and really trying to think of games at a bigger level. How do we make our world better with using things like play and games? And I'm curious, because some of our listeners are probably familiar with some of your previous work, but could you maybe point to a few examples that you found that you're hoping people will discover through the course of gaming for good examples?
So a lot of what I point people to is to look at places of informal learning. I think museums in general are on the forefront of the spaces where you can see games and play for learning outcomes. We're starting to see some of this come through health education. There's really crappy things happening in gamification. And so that's this application of game-like elements to try and motivate you to do something. One of my research areas is something I call meaningful gamification, and the students will learn about that. And that's how to use game elements that aren't rewards to get people engaged in something. But I think the easiest thing is go to a museum and look what museums have become. We're seeing that also now in places like zoos and aquariums, that there's actually more playful activities that are coming into these spaces. So it's really this idea of understanding that playful design. And one thing I'm looking forward to also in being in Canada as compared to the US. Right now the US has this teaching to the test model that has created a hostile model for teachers to experiment. That teachers they don't believe they can experiment because if they end up with their students getting a lower score, then they can have their jobs penalized. And so it's actually been frustrating for those of us who are game researchers to get our games into classrooms. That's why I focus on these informal learning spaces. But up there in Canada, they don't have this teaching to the test model. And therefore, teachers, I've already been talking with teachers up there who are thrilled about this idea of being able to experiment in classes with different sorts of games and play to engage students.
Now,
It's a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dylan. I just wanted to.
Sorry, No, you go ahead. You do your bit, and I'll
sorry.
ask you a question.
This is so interesting to me as an educator as well. So, teaching to the test. It sort of does happen a little bit with certain grades. They will test specific things. How does gamification? No, sorry. Oops, the dirty word. How does play and games work into not teaching to the test? How can we break that cycle? Because I would love to break it.
So the first thing to catch on, gamification, I use that word because what I want to help people is to realize that gamification does not have to be about rewards. And so there's a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, which is a book about in U.S. politics how the Republicans have controlled language. And if we give up on the word gamification and say it's all awful, then we never have a chance of helping someone who wants to use gamification define gamification based upon story or play or choice or narrative or things like that. So it's okay to take that term. And one thing that I use, so I use two terms separately. I use game-based learning and gamification. So gamification is like the syllabus. It's this layer on top of something in the class that's used to engage people. So in my classes, many classes, I let my students create a narrative, a personal narrative that they're going to explore throughout the class. It's a layer. It's on top of everything, but it gives them context for everything they do. And because they set that narrative, they're more inspired to engage with it. So I've been teaching public speaking, and each student gets to start their own fictional company, and everything they do is in line with that fictional company, so they're more inspired. Game-based learning, on the other hand, is when you're using a game or a play activity to teach a specific topic. And the learning of the topic is engaged deeply with the game mechanism, so you couldn't pull those two things apart. So it's important for, again, that's that idea of building a toolkit. When I come into a classroom, are you needing gamification? Are you needing a motivational activity that gets people engaged overall in what's going on? Or are you using game-based learning, where you're trying to give them some playful or gameful way of actually learning something in the class?
Now, we mentioned gamification as the dirty word because it was extremely popular a few years ago and then slowly became basically, in most people's minds, meant badges. You know, like you're going to get a badge or an achievement level for this. How can we kind of cleanse this ill influence from the term gamification and bring it back to meaningful play?
We may or may not be able to. If we give up on it, we won't. So that is why when I talk about, I came up with that phrase of meaningful gamification because it also implies the opposite of meaningless gamification. And so, but the thing is, badges, we talk about badges, but the reality is our school systems have been gamified for a very long time. We've had this common set of badges that we exchange across classes that have values. We call them A, B, C, D, and F. We've had this industrialized badging system that actually has ruined schools. I think schools in general, this industrialized education space is in a bad state because the students come in, they don't have that motivation, and so it was one of my classes. I experiment with letting the students set the syllabus, coming up with, they design the syllabus, they design the grading structure. In the semesters I've taught that course, I've never had the students say everyone gets an A. And I've thought about what would I do if they said everyone gets an A. And what I would do is the same thing I would like to do with schools, where I would say, okay, everyone gets an A, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in someone from the community, and we're going to work on a real-world project. And during that project, you're going to learn the skills you need to learn in this class, but you're going to make a difference in the world. And that's, if I could change education, I would ditch the whole grading system, because grades as rewards are extrinsic motivation that hurts intrinsic motivation. Before kids go to school, they want to learn about the world. Then they go to school and they're rewarded for learning. And guess what happens? Their own desire to learn goes away. And so then, when they become at the level where I'll be dealing with them, it's the question of, are we going to be graded for this? And if they're not going to be graded for it, then they're not going to do it. And so that's a frustration we run into, that when I talk about gamification, I try to help people understand, in the short term it makes a difference. In the long term, it can be really harmful. So the challenge here is that we already have a broken education system that's built on reward-based spaces. So badges, if you want to call them badges, you want to call them grades, there are ways to use badges that aren't as bad. And that's where you allow the learners to actually say what they want to do, and then the badges become a pathway to help them do that. So the learner comes in and says, I would like to tackle this task for this reason. And then you say, okay, if you want to do that, here are 5 badges to earn that will let you do that. With the learner set goal, that then does not make the badges the reward. It makes badges informational to understand subsets, which can actually be better than just getting an A, B, C, or D, but can understand, I need to achieve this, then this, and this, and then I'll be able to do that thing I wanted to do.
That's absolutely excellent. I mean, it's wonderful to hear this kind of idea coming out of not just experiments in you know, classes that are you know, private schools and whatnot, or Montessori's and things like that, where they're doing different styles of learning, but that it's actually in a mainstream school. But speaking of experiments, I wanted to say that I'd read a few of your papers on the experiments that you're doing in class, and I'm hoping, actually, if we can post the links to some of those papers, either on our website or whatnot, I'll just kind of stick that into our chat to remind about. But if you could tell us a little bit about the experimentation that you're doing in class.
So there was a book called The Multiplayer Classroom, and the book was about how to use gamification to engage people in the class. And the idea was putting this whole MMORPG, this massively multiplayer online role-playing game structure, onto a class. And I said, okay, I'm going to take that and apply it in a non-game class setting, because the instructor had been using it in classes that were game classes. So they had students that were already comfortable with gaming. So I wanted to say, well, does it actually work when it's not a gaming class? And what I found is adding these layers of leaderboards and points and badges, it really took away from the learning experience for students that weren't comfortable with the game space. It confused the issue. It frustrated students. In fact, in one class where I had leaderboards in the class, what I found is that 3 of the students loved the leaderboards, and they performed and performed and performed. About a third of the class performed for a few weeks and then flatlined and stopped doing anything. And the rest of the class didn't even start. They just sat there and they gave up. So it was 6 weeks of the class where I ran this, and then I just put a stop to it, because I was getting ready to lose 2/3 of my class because they were so demotivated by the leaderboards. Leaderboards are great for people that are motivated by them, which are the top few, but basically the role of a leaderboard is you're here, and there's 2 types of people. There's the people that hate you and the people that you hate. And so it creates that space on the leaderboard, and it's demotivating for the people that don't need to be demotivated. The people that are on the bottom, they don't need this demotivational punch in the face. So a lot of what I've been doing is I've been thinking about play and story. How do I engage those students that need the help, that need some support? The strong students are going to do well, but how do I create? And part of that is letting the students create these narratives and create their own stories, because that, I find, is really helps students who aren't engaged to become engaged, because they're now doing something that is meaningful to them.
That's awesome. I'm a professor at Fanshawe College here in London, and I would love to change my curricula around to something more like that. I was brought up in what's called problem-based learning at McMaster University, where I did my degree in occupational therapy, and so we are focused on basically inquiry and real-world problem-solving type things. And the class that I'm teaching now in developmental psychology and augmentative communication for developmental service workers is such that some of it is like so distinctly information overload. Developmental psychology is just overload, overload, overload. This is the information you need to know it cold. And then once we get to second and third year, we're looking at more things where we could do that play-based learning. And I don't think the faculty is ready for that, but I want them to be ready for that because I think the students could really learn in that way instead of being so task-oriented. So, this I need to know this to fill in this blank. They would be more activity-oriented and less caring about, hopefully less caring about their mark and more caring about the experience that they're getting. And so a lot of the stuff that you're saying is, speaking volumes to me as an educator, as a game designer, and all that kind of stuff. Before I go on, I just wanted to put a plug out for everybody out there in social media land. Twitter us at Meeple Syrup. Engage in the YouTube channel and ask Scott questions. Anything you want to know about play, about games, about the educational program he's setting up in Brantford, please ask. Daryl's minding the feed, and he'll look into that. So a question for you, Scott, in terms of what you're looking at for your own program, how are you going to basically practice what you're preaching in your program at Wilfrid Laurier?
I'm going to ask my students to help. In the same way that I've done in other classes, I start out with a discussion with the students, and we will work together to set what their class looks like. That's what I find is there's two things that I have found out of all the stuff I tried out. There were two things I carried forward with me, and they're both based in this concept of play. The difference between play and games. So one of the big differences is in play, if we are playing in the terms of like free play as compared to playing a game, we are all co-creators of that system. And if we want to change those rules, we can do so. We can make that decision to change it. And that's what differentiates play from games. In a game, you come together, you agree upon a set of rules that you're all going to stick to. But in play, if you want to change that up, you can. In fact, I used play theory when I designed, cheap plug, going. So what I did with that game is by enabling players to have the ability to count from 10 to 1 to set the pace of a round, I gave up control as a game designer of what the game experience will be. Because based upon whether that count is fast or slow, it's a totally different game experience. If someone counts very fast and everyone's throwing cubes in the cups, it's just ridiculous chaos. And if someone's very slow, it's much more of a thinky strategy game. And so, and that's an encouragement I would have for designers. What can you give up? What can you put in the hands of players to allow them to create an experience that's more meaningful to them? So the two lessons that I took away from all those experiments that I'm still using in my classes. One, as I talked about earlier, give the students some agency. They need to have some ability, whether they're setting the course structure, whether they're setting their own personal narrative, whether they're setting what they're looking at, they give them some agency. Even in a class that's information overload, like the one you talked about, you could still allow the students to have choices of what kinds of ways are they going to demonstrate their knowledge. That if everyone doesn't have to do a multiple choice test, but you're actually giving them choices, some way of them, and there's actually, this is a learning theory, that this idea that you want to give people that ability to demonstrate how they've learned in a way they're comfortable with when you want to focus on the content. But the second thing is that play is about getting another chance. Play is about failing and learning and trying again. So one thing I put in a lot of my classes is the ability for students to redo. That I come in with a high standard, a high expectation, and I tell them that, but then I'm going to give them a chance to redo things to improve. So I say, try it. If you make a valid attempt, then you'll get a chance to redo it. And those are the two things based out of play that I continue to use in my teaching. Plus, lots of hands. I use lots of hands in my teaching.
I love this play stuff. I could listen to this forever. I know. Actually, you use the example of going, gone, and I remember just being challenged as a game designer, thinking through those lessons of play and how I could apply them to other games. So I have a party game that uses very similar this idea of allowing some of the boundaries to be created, or really not even boundaries are there, play around with it and see what's going to be created. And so for me, I find that very inspiring. And I want to maybe change gears slightly, even though this is wonderful, but I have to ask, because you're also doing wonderful study of escape rooms. And talking about play, I have to, my mind goes to escape rooms as well, and this new kind of phenomenon, or not new, in a lot of ways as well. As you've done your research, you've uncovered there's really a breadth of history and examples. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit of what you're discovering, and even maybe highlight, I know you were at MIT recently, and you're also going to give a talk in Denmark. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, so if maybe you could give a little bit of information about those.
So I got involved in escape rooms late last year. I was in Singapore, actually, doing some consulting with the government about meaningful gamification, and they are huge in Asia. And so every shopping mall had an escape room facility. And you'd walk into every mall, and there was an escape room set up. And so I wanted to make sure and explore that while I was there. And while I was doing it, I thought two things. One, I thought, hey, this is just like all that live-action role-playing stuff I did when I was in college. I was a heavy LARPer for 10 years, and I'm proud to talk about that because my first book is actually Cthulhu Live. I was one of the authors on the first edition of Cthulhu Live, and much of what I learned from LARPing is actually how I engage with the world today. I am actually an introvert by nature, but LARPing taught me how to put on a character, how to put on a persona. So the escape room space, I thought, well, this is a lot like what I used to do. And then the other thing I thought about is this would be really a useful tool for informal learning. That taking these concepts from escape rooms and bringing them over to museums, to libraries, to zoos, to aquariums, places of informal learning, could create an activity that really gets people passionately engaged in something because of the tight time constraint and the face-to-face engagement. The other thing another reason I'm happy to move up near Toronto is because it is the North American hub for both board game cafes and escape rooms. In late 2003, there was one escape room in Ontario. At the end of 2004, there were over 40.
Yep.
That explosion is going to hit the U.S. over the next year or so, but it's not there now. We're going to see that, I'm sure, because we're seeing
we just started to see that with the cafes. Yeah.
Right. So I'm excited to be near a hub of people who are interested in face-to-face gaming. There's a lot of similarities between the board game space and people that like to do escape rooms. That idea of engaging with people in a face-to-face way around a playful activity. In fact, the first escape room that is well documented was in 2007 in Japan by a publishing company called Scrap. They did it as a promo for their customers. The previous year, in 2006, their promo was bringing in German beer and German board games. So I found this
nice
interesting. Yeah, there's that connection there of activities that engage people in a face-to-face space. Yeah. And so I see there's a ton of crossover between these two groups. So I started studying it, and as a social scientist, I like to ask people things. So there's different ways to approach game studies. So there are some game studies people who come out of a film studies background where they look at a critical analysis of a game and analyze it from that way. Some other people who come from more of a programming background are looking to tear it apart. For me, I come out of the social sciences, so I look at the impact that games have on people. So like a good social scientist, the first thing you want to do is establish some baseline. So I actually mined the internet and found 400 escape room facilities and wrote them all an email and came up with a survey that was about 100 questions long. And so over several iterations of asking for emails, I got 175 replies out of 400 that I contacted, which, if you know anything about research, is a stunning percentage to get in an over-the-transom email survey. Usually you're happy to get like 10%. Yeah. And, I was approaching half, which is indicative of what I learned, is that they're very secretive. They don't like to share what they're doing. So there isn't a good, strong community of escape room creators. There aren't good resources because, again, people they're built on these spaces where they don't like to share what's going on. But there was a lot of hunger for, hey, maybe here's someone who's trusted that we can all tell what we're doing and he'll feed it back to us in a way that doesn't hurt any of the secrets of any of the rooms. I had a lot of one-on-one conversations with escape room companies when they got my request and they asked to Skype with me or chat with me to figure out my intentions. The number one question was always, are you starting your own escape room? Are you starting your own franchise? Are you just taking all of our information? And I had to convince them, it's like, well, no, I'm not going into this for business. I am looking to help informal learning folks figure out how to use escape rooms, and I may do research in that direction, but I'm not looking to start a giant, come to the Scott Nicholson escape room franchise.
That'd be fun, though.
Or would it? I don't know if you want to be in this little head of mine. I've got a lot of really unpleasant ideas of what to do with people. So, because actually there's the thing about Nordic LARPing, which is really about getting together for a weekend and doing something really unpleasant that I think we could bring over into escape rooms. But anyway, another story. So I said, well, this survey, what I actually did in 2007, I did a similar process with gaming and libraries. So in 2007, I actually randomly called 400 public libraries and talked to them about how they did gaming, and that established some baseline of how libraries were using gaming that was really useful to move forward. In the same way that I've now established a baseline about what these escape rooms are, what they look like, what sort of puzzles go into them, that now we can begin to move forward. And I want to begin to explore good design of escape rooms. There's a lot of really poorly designed escape rooms. I actually compare them, escape room design right now, to kind of arcade games in the 1980s, in that we're figuring out mechanisms and kind of playing with, well, how does jumping work and how does shooting work, how do black lights work, how do padlocks work. And the next step is to begin really thinking about narrative and begin thinking about how do you create a narrative and a theme that's meaningful. So I'm making one right now for a local battleground, Fort Stanwix. And so the idea, the story behind it is a real story of something that went on with sabotage at the fort. The puzzles are actually all based on different methods of Revolutionary War cryptography. So the players learn about how messages were encoded, and the affordances is this game designer term for the way that the players interact with the puzzles. They're all going to be based in authentic ways of engaging with these things. And I'm developing that to present that as say, this is what we should go for, where the story makes sense, where the puzzles help tell the story, and the way you do the puzzles fit within the story and the narrative, as compared to, hey, I'm in Egypt, here's a laser maze, yay.
Absolutely. I got to follow up. You mentioned it, and I can't help but think of your book. And a lot of the earlier research that I ran into was your work with libraries. And also now there seems to be more and more, for example, game cafes and libraries that are thinking in more community-oriented space, where they're thinking of how do I curate, a game collection that's going to interact well with the community. What are important questions to be thinking about, and what are good ways for people to be thinking of games and play, and especially with the library in mind.
And so just like a good game shop and just like a good board game cafe, with libraries, it's understanding, as you mentioned, understanding your local community. You can't have this generic selection and say this is going to work for everyone. Yeah. And instead, it's really about the library understanding that just like they choose books for their community, they need to choose game experiences. One of the big problems I ran into when I started dealing with people in libraries who wanted to bring in games is the same problem I have with students who come into a games program. They're really good at one sort of thing. So they are a Euro gamer, they are a League of Legends player, they are a hardcore war gamer, and they believe the best thing for the library to have is Euro games, League of Legends, war games. And so my book, Everyone Plays at the Library, the whole idea from that book is to say, no, step back and start with the goals of the library. And based on the goals of the library, figure out what you're trying to do. And based upon that, then choose game experiences. So I built a model, a framework, to help people pick game experiences they want to bring into the library. Is it more a social experience, or a narrative experience, or an action experience, or a knowledge-based experience, or a strategy experience? Those are my 5 areas. I use SNAKS, S-N-A-K-S, to remember them. But the idea is, you say, for this library goal, we need a strategy game experience. Okay, for that strategy game experience, who's our audience? And then what kind of gaming platform will help bring that across? Is it a tabletop platform? Is it a tablet platform? Is it a digital platform? Is it a live action platform? And then pick the games. And then what you can do is you can assess, did that game help bring about that goal? Because one problem with library gaming programs is if you just do them and have fun and you don't actually assess to see if you met your goals, well then when someone challenges the program, why are you wasting all this money on libraries? Well, then you have that data stream to go back and say, look, it's because we have this goal that was established for our library as a way to serve the community, and we are meeting it through this set of games, and we're assessing it to demonstrate, yeah, we're making that difference.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. Some of your writings were very influential in helping me think through, with the game cafes opening up, I got to help curate and help encourage what games to, get in the cafes, and I know Sen has done the same, and we've had a lot of great conversations about, what games are really effective in our communities and what are great ways to help grow and then measure them, as you're saying. But I'm going to segue over to Dylan, because I know Dylan has a great question from one of our favorite audience members, and also covering another gear, because our time's running out. We got to cover as much as we can. Dylan, what do you got?
Suze, I love your cogent cake, and this is some very cogent cake indeed. But the question was about kind of picking up on your point about the people bringing their own specific specialties to the table, and Suze wanted to know how have the video game influences of the current generation, the people who are going to be your students, impacted analog games? What does that cross-pollination look like, and is there a current cross-pollination? Is it any different than it was before?
So tablet-based gaming, I think, has created the most cross-pollination between those two things. That being able to game in a mobile space has introduced a lot of people to the world of tabletop games. And once they understand, because the nice thing about a tablet-based game is it helps teach you the rules. You understand if it's something that you like, so then you're willing to risk $40 or $50 on this box to engage with each other. So that's probably been the biggest crossover. But the reality is, with any of these sorts of games, it comes down to what kind of experience do I want to have with people. A lot of what I focus on are multiplayer games, shared experiences. And so I talk about face-to-face games, face-to-screen games, and face-to-place games. So face-to-face games are like tabletop games and escape rooms, and face-to-screen games are where you're staring at a screen, even if you're playing with other people. And face-to-place games are where the place itself matters. So like an escape room is both a face-to-place game and a face-to-face game, and it can be a face-to-screen game if those screen-based elements are in there as well. And so that's why they're an intriguing space, because you can have all these different parts of design. I'm writing grant proposals right now to build an escape room research facility. Where actually I'm going to, if I can install the GLaDOS operating system throughout and push players through a series of explorations. But that's one of my hopes. I'm also pushing people to use the term adventure rooms instead of escape rooms, because I think it's broader and encompasses more of what I want to encourage, which is the idea of having an adventure, which might happen to be escaping a room. But those are all sort of my future paths, my future fights to have. Right now, my future fight is just figuring out how to get up to Canada.
Well, now you're definitely thinking with portals, but I'll pass it on to Sen for the next question.
My next question, and it's possibly one of the last questions that we're going to get time to ask you, Scott, is about the notion of learning as being an adventure instead of an escape. I think that's really, to borrow Dylan's phrase, it's cogent. It's entirely, when you just said it, it clicked. It's like, yeah, learning should be an adventure, should not be an escape. We don't want to run away from this. We want to engage with what we should be interested in any program, in any faculty. We need to create curricula that our students care about enough to learn it, and then get our point across as faculty that this is the underlying stuff that you need to know, but you're going to learn it in a way, or you're going to want to learn it despite the fact that it's hard, or whatever, and engage with it. So as a fellow educator, what kind of suggestions would you give to a person who is having difficulty developing that kind of curricula that can be very engaging, even though it is very top-heavy or something like that?
So what you want to think of, in order to have an adventure, there's a few things that come into play. One is the person needs to have choices. They need to have agency. They need to create. I do a lot of work with game jams, where I have people I've run game jams in museums and game jams. I ran one in a science museum with communities where I get people to create games. Because creating games is actually a play activity, but get you to engage in something in a new way. So that'd be my first suggestion, is think about some sort of a game jam. The second is you want them to feel like a hero. So you want them to have moments in that exploration where they feel like, yeah, I'm accomplishing something. And the third thing is actually out of spectacle. There are moments where they feel like and they realize they've been able to do something that's a little bit bigger than themselves, something that they didn't do ahead of time. There's a self-determination theory, which is a motivational theory, which has 3 parts, and that's this idea of that you are meeting up with other people and you're feeling about your place with others moving forward, that you're getting better at your place in the world, and that you're getting better at something. And so this idea of helping people to be a hero is actually, I got that from an interview with the folks who run a group called 5 Wits, which is an escape room type activity that's been around since 2003. And they found, of everything they had people do, the 3 things that came into play consistently were that people were heroes, that there was a spectacle, and that they were challenged. I'll actually post a link to a YouTube video that's a TED Talk from that person where he talks about these things and creating these analog experiences that could be great lessons for board game designers to think about how do you help do that for players.
I love it. I actually help with my local game jam at the Games Institute at University of Waterloo. So I cannot echo that enough. I know recently, actually, you were at MIT's a game jam, and so I would love to hear a little bit about that because the focus was on adventure rooms. And could you tell us a little bit about what you saw, what are they doing? Because the game jams that I've been involved with have been mostly focused on either digital games or board games. Can you tell us a little bit about a game jam that had a focus on adventure rooms?
So this was the MIT Escape Room Game Jam. It was sponsored by Red Bull. The first thing we did Friday night is we watched the progress on a movie that's coming out in 2016. It's made by kind of a Red Bull design studio. So they explained it's not done. You'll see about an hour and a half of it, but there's more, but you'll see enough to understand what to do. And the idea is that Red Bull wants to create use this movie at tie-in to create an escape room contest where hundreds of students at universities would all compete through escape room activities to be able to go and be one of the top 10 schools, or top 10 teams to go and compete. And so through the first day, because a lot of people don't know that much about escape rooms, the first day were more seminars. So I did the keynote piece where I laid out what's going on with escape rooms in general. There were seminars on narrative design, on puzzle design, talking about what are the narrative parts from the movie. And between each round, people were grouped into different groups and came up with brainstorms. And then later on, they pitched what they wanted to do, and the next day was really spent in the jam crafting, because I talked about if you want to make a narrative-based escape room, you don't start with puzzles. You start with the player experience. What's the player experience you want to create? What's the narrative that's going to help you tell that player experience? And only then choose the puzzles. And that's this flip of how you create stuff. Is start with the player experience first, build it from that. And that's where a lot of escape rooms are not doing that. That it's like, hey, here's a room of random puzzles, and here's a black light. And so, but we're so early in that. That's why I'd like to compare it to, like, if you think about Pac-Man, think about Galaga, and think about the narrative in those games. You know, it really wasn't tied in. And the focus in all those games was that score, getting more and more points. And as time went on, we've now focused on games that are more about narrative and story. That's more important than the score and building up your character. That's the cool stuff that's going on. So the teams all then presented stuff, and then we will see if anything goes on. Folks from Red Bull were there. They watched what was happening. If they decide to move forward with this, I'll continue to be involved in what this will actually look like. So if in the middle of 2016 you hear about this international Red Bull Mind Games where people are doing escape room competitions, it all started with that escape room game jam there at MIT.
Cool. It's getting that time of night where we have to start thinking about last questions, and the last question that we normally ask of all of our people on the show is, if you had one piece of advice to give to a budding game designer, what would it be? But I'm gonna modify that a little bit just to kind of Nicholsonify it and say, how can a new budding game designer who's got some great ideas about what games they want to create integrate the narrative and just that spirit of play into their initial designs?
So I guess I'll answer the first question about the common advice. And I mean, the biggest common advice is play lots of games and play games you hate. And along the lines of that, so I'll segue into that, is realize you're not making games for you, but you're making games for an audience. You're making games for people that aren't you. And for that group of people that aren't you, you need to figure out what's going to make them feel like a hero. What is the sort of play that they're going to be engaged in? There's a good paper out there, which I can post a link to, that gives 8 types of play and 8 types of fun. And so thinking about what sort of fun do I want to enable? Where do I want to? I'm going to control all of these elements. I'm going to unlock this one. And the one that you unlock should be based upon what sort of play experience you want to help people engage with. So you asked about what I'm doing in Denmark. I'm actually leaving for Denmark on Saturday and running a workshop and a final keynote. And at the final keynote, we're going to do a play jam instead of a game jam, where we're actually going to have people create a form of play based on one of these 8 templates. If you're going to be attending, then don't listen because there's a spoiler, but I'm going to make them go into it, getting in groups and choosing whether they're going to play on easy mode or hard mode. If they choose to play in easy mode, then they can use the stuff that's in their pockets. If they choose hard mode, they can only use their bodies to come up with some form of play. So we'll see how that works out.
Excellent. Last question for me. Really, you've answered a ton of the questions that I had already as a game designer and an educator. And now I really just want to know, how do people get into the program that you're in right now? What do they need to do? What are their prerequisites? Who do they contact? What's the syllabus going to look like, other than that they're helping create it?
Yeah. So for that, you would go to Wilfrid Laurier University's website and look for the program on game design and development. There's a place to apply. We've already had 170 people apply for the fall semester. I know 70 have already been admitted. The original plan was to have an introductory class of 20. So, so we've already blown that off the charts. So it's going to be an exciting time as we chart this course together. The other part of that answer is I really don't know because I'm not working there yet. I'm still a professor at Syracuse University for the next 2 months, and so since I'm not yet a professor up there, I am not involved in all the internal processes. Processes. So I have to practice my Canadian. And so I will find all of the processes out as I get engaged more and more. I'll be starting up there July 1st.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
We can't wait to have you up here, and we'll see you in a couple weeks anyway. But yes, it'll be lovely to have you here.
I wanted to say great job also by your pronunciation of Toronto.
Yes, I had a border agent.
Right?
A border agent made me learn that. That he wouldn't let me in. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Toronto." And he said, "We don't have a city named Toronto." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's called Toronto. Toronto. He said, "Say it after me. Say Toronto. Toronto. Okay, you can go to Toronto." And so I've tried to learn.
You did excellent in your video. I want to thank everyone that's watching. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Scott, for being here. I also want to let everyone know. I know the time flew by, and people are so interested in discussing a lot of these things more. That's what we hope we do with our show. So keep tuning in week to week. But also, Scott has offered once he's settled in and down this way more to pop by the show on a regular basis. So we're hoping to keep checking in, see what things are going on at the BGN lab, and find out more about the program. So as the students and Scott create it, then we'll keep you updated with what things are happening down there. And
you'll be close enough for me to visit you.
Yes.
That's kind of scary.
I was actually saying, by the way, you guys are close enough to help him move his stuff.
Yes.
Even better.
Although
I don't know if I'd end up with all of my boxes of games then delivered to the appropriate places.
You never know. You did get rid of a lot of them.
That's right. Actually, I have boxes that came from Alan Moon's move that are I'll teleport my game up to Canada. So they have a lineage.
Yes, absolutely. Nice. So thank you, everyone. We want to encourage you, keep making the world better, playing games, making games, finding ways to be inclusive, and we just appreciate you being part of our show, and have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, hey, you know what? I've been so engaged in this conversation.
Oh, you didn't set up the reel.
Yeah, I didn't set up
the reel. Normally we
get
the Academy Awards treatment here, and now it's just completely.
And now it's the other way around. He was so engaged.
Normally I cut
you guys off. Give you a chance to plug next week's episode. Next week we have on Josh Capel in for Dylan. And we're going to be actually talking about kind of a preemptive strike on the Gathering of Friends. So what things we're looking forward to, what people we might be able to interview. Because of the great support we got at Kickstarter, we're going to actually film every day that we're at the Gathering of Friends and give you a little update of what we've experienced. So our hope next week is to have a few of those things lined up, and we can give you a preview of that. Anyways, I think that's my cue. Have a great night.